Good evening. Welcome to the public work session of the Ashland Town Council on August 25th, 2015. This is a work session. No actions will be taken. It is also not an evening for public comment. You're welcome to listen. If you have questions or comments, feel free to communicate with members of the council afterwards. You will have another public work session next Wednesday on the same topic. Charles, that's at 7 o'clock, or is that 6:30?
I believe that one's at 6:30, Mr. Mayor.
Next Wednesday at 6:30, another work session. Again, not a time for public input, but more information gathering on the part of council. We will then schedule some public input sessions later in the month of September, where there will be plenty of opportunity for citizens to speak before council, ask your questions, express your concerns, and we're not going to take any action until all of that has happened. So we're trying to keep this as open and transparent as possible. The model we're going to follow this evening, we will hear briefly from town staff. We will then let representation from Ashland Main Street, who have been operating the theater, and have some ideas of their own on doing this. Council will interact with those people. We will interact with one another. And hopefully we will all come out of this healthier and more knowledgeable about the process going forward. Charles, you want to start off for staff?
Sure. I'll just give a brief overview of how we got to where we are today, so folks can rewind back to 2013. The town, based on the generosity of A.D. and Gene Whitaker, donated the theater of the town of Ashland. At that point in time, staff along with council started researching options on how to operate the theater, what to do with the theater, and then based on that, had several discussions with a combination of public and nonprofit and private potential partners. Eventually, we were approached by the Ashland Main Street Association. They had the interest and the idea to run what they refer to as a pop-up theater, which they've been doing so successfully for the last several months. They've had live music, they've had movies, all sorts of things, theater, and I think that's been very helpful in bringing the theater to the attention of the community and keeping it in the spotlight. Also during that time, staff began working with the Department of Housing and Community Development along with the Ashland Main Street Association, and AMSA was able to apply for a feasibility study grant from the Virginia Department of Housing and Community Development, which they received for $25,000. Before that time, the town had put out a request for qualifications and a request for proposals from individuals or groups or firms that had an interest in working with the town to develop the theater. At that point in time, the most likely prospect that came out of that process was Waukesha Development, which is Dave McCormick, a firm and an individual out of Petersburg, Virginia. At that time, then Main Street proceeded to start working with Mr. McCormick on the feasibility study. And simultaneously, staff identified grant funding also from the Department of Housing and Community Development through the Industrial Revitalization Fund. And late last year, the town was awarded a $500,000 matching grant from the state, which the town had been saving for in the last 2 fiscal years in its capital projects fund. So the town does have $500,000 set aside in its savings account, basically, to put towards the theater and to match this potential grant. Earlier this summer, the Main Street Theater Committee continued to work with Mr. McCormick, finalized this document, and then based on recommendations from both the members of the Main Street Association and town staff, we recommended jointly that they come to town council with some recommendations on some concerns they had with the feasibility study, some questions, things they'd like more information on, and that's why we're here this evening. And I'm happy to let Mr. Joyce or whoever add or subtract from that basic history.
Well, first, we'd like to thank the Ashland Main Street Association, and in particular the Ashland Main Street Association Theater Committee. We'd like to thank the town staff, council for letting us, shall we say, play with the building and test it. And we believe it's been it has been very gratifying and very successful to pop the building open to see how it might connect and engage with the community, how it may connect and engage and increase economic velocity for the community, community engagement, and community quality of life. And we think that, well, we know that the building can do that, and we know the building can do that in a myriad of different ways, and I think that's really the pathway that we need to move forward as we go through the process now of deciding exactly what to do with the building. It is a very exciting building. It is, in my opinion, a building that needs to be treated with great care, dealt with great care, because it's so important. You know, when we laugh about it being the ruby slippers, or one of the ruby slippers here in Ashland. So it's so important that we pay attention to it and what we do with it and how we do it and how we allocate good and important money into the project. So we're just excited to be here. We are working diligently not to, we want to be a resource to help you all make the final decision, and we don't want to be very careful not to make the decision. So we have a feasibility study. We think there are good points in here. We think there are points we don't agree with. We've submitted comments to all council members and interested parties as to what we think is good, what we think has areas of concern. And at the end of the day, what we really think is important is that a plan is developed that really engages this community and engages this important asset in the best way. And there are myriads of pathways down there. And I've gone through different periods of enlightenment, and I get enlightened this way and that way. So we will do, the Theater Committee and Ashland Main Street Association will do whatever we can do to help however we end up moving forward with the project. So we stand ready to assist.
And I'm handing out, Jen put this together, it's just a compilation, and I'll go ahead and have a couple extra handouts for folks in the audience here. Just a rundown of what we've done so far.
And I defer to Clark in one of my very active theater committee volunteers. And Clark, why don't you just kind of summarize kind of what's been going on in the building? And
Well, we started out by just changing the marquee, approaching towns, and we should put a new quote up once a month, and then can we, let's write an MOU for that, and then can we put up new movie posters? Sure, we'll amend the MOU, and then it was, can we operate it? Well, it needs some work to get up to code. So, Hugh said we kind of played around a little bit, got the fire department in there. It was in pretty good shape. A lot of things you can't see. A.D. Whitaker took care of HVAC, some of the remediation for asbestos, things that cost a good deal of money that you don't necessarily see. So we got the fire department in there. They gave us a punch list of things and a combination of in-kinds from Hugh Joyce's company, approaching probably $20,000, $25,000. Chopper as a general contractor going and doing the ceiling. I donated a little bit, so we put some money in there to get the things you see like the neon going, but some fire safety things as well. And this is a rundown of, we've done 60 events total. The feasibility study calls for the first year having about 40 live events and then supplementing with a dozen, 2 dozen other events. So far we've done about 60 pop-up events, and they've included 48 movies. We've done 13 fundraisers. We've had 10 businesses that have sponsored movies, renting the theater out. We've had a couple live theater performances. The Whistle Stop Theater Company calling it home for the last year. We've had live music performances. So we've done a kind of a variety of things, and based on that, we had some free events during the holidays with the Easter Bunny. We had Santa Claus there during the holidays. Folks baked cookies and came in, got their photos. We try to really engage different parts of the community. One of our priorities when we sat down was we don't want just middle-aged white people coming to the theater, that we have a diverse town. And we want, as evidenced tonight at the workshop, we need to do a better job of bringing a more diverse group in to talk about community things. So we did, we showed Selma at the theater, partnering with Randolph-Macon and a couple other groups. We showed Do the Right Thing with a discussion afterwards. And we've had a couple Richmond area football clinics in there. Michael Anderson from the Seahawks appearing at one, and that was 300 folks. That's 333 is the capacity at the theater. So anyway, with all of that, we worked, like Charles said, we're kind of curious what the feasibility study would say, what it wouldn't say, and to provide some feedback. And we've provided feedback. So kind of the unfortunate rollout of the feasibility study, I think it got in folks' hands in draft form. we're kind of under the impression it's still in draft form. We've provided some feedback and have been told that we'll be getting an updated feasibility study. But, you know, and this is kind of the big bucket items, I guess, for us. One was, what's the goal? What's the stated goal of the theater? What does the town want to see happen there? Is it economic generator for the town in terms of rent that will be collected? Is it foot traffic and engaging different folks in the community? And so before we could really sit down and we read it, before we could really evaluate the feasibility study, we've been trying to get our arms around what is the stated goal for the town in terms of the theater. And that's something I thought would be a good thing just to talk about. Is it a moneymaker for the town? Is it a moneymaker through tax revenue? Or is it that we want the town, you know, we want it open for business, generating foot traffic in the town, not pumping money into it on a monthly basis, or some combination of those things. Is that fair? Place to start, I guess? Good?
So you're asking?
Yeah.
That was not rhetorical, you're
No,
looking for.
yeah.
From my point of view, it has to be a cross-section of those two. It's not about the town making money per se, but it is about the theater being an economic generator for the town itself. So, and when I say town, I don't mean town government. I mean an economic generator for other businesses, increasing the life of business along that corridor, bringing people to town who might not ordinarily come to town, spending money in other businesses.
Yeah, I might be seen as having a low bar to meet on this, but if it pays for itself and stays open and provides the center for local businesses or center for community interest, activities that bring in, as you alluded to earlier, a cross-section of citizens and users, I think having it open in itself is a pretty good accomplishment. And it's not because I've been used to it being closed for so long. I remember seeing movies there when I was a teenager, and that wasn't a couple of years ago. So, you know, I don't see a tremendous need for it to bring in lots of cash to the town coffers, but it's an asset, and an asset that you don't want to waste. And so I'd like to see it provide for the community, and not necessarily in lots of cash, but in just the vitality that having a working theater brings to the community. If you look at, I've kind of looked at the theater as if it was a portrait of Ashland. You know, that was some missing teeth or a black eye, you know, and on the individual in that portrait. And so having it open brings that portrait looking good again, trying to make it look its best. And I'm satisfied to have it looking good. You know, the face of Ashland is represented with the theater in the center of it. If that's looking good and paying for itself, then I'm happy with that. If it does more, wonderful.
I think so used to seeing it empty, sort of like what you're saying, that it's been in the liability column for the town in a lot of ways. It hasn't really helped the town, and so when this first happened, my thought was, at bare minimum, let's get to the neutral level where, as you say, it's sort of self-sustaining. We can generate enough revenue to take care of it structurally and safety and so on and so forth. And anything beyond that sort of became icing on the cake. As we talked about this more, though, and seeing some of the things you guys have done with it and some of the ideas kicked around, I think sustaining it is the absolute bare minimum we accept here, that it does have potential to become kind of a jewel in the crown here, another draw as we try to generate some synergy among the art and things going on downtown, train day, just one thing after another. It's just one more thing to draw some regional focus to the town, perhaps get recognition statewide or even bigger. And again, I'm also not thinking of this as a big revenue source for the town or anything like that. It is I mean, it's still a modest theater in a small town, but I think if, like you say, if we can generate foot traffic, interest from outside, people interested in coming back here, and another reason for people to come back, another thing for them to do on train day or on a date night or something like that, it's goodness for the town. And I guess I tend to be a little conservative on that stuff, or I tend to undershoot the mark sometimes. So I'm glad we've had people who are envisioning something a little bigger than I might have.
Let me add one more clarification. When I say sustainable, I would hope that those things that are paying events would bring in enough to where we can do community events, or as y'all did with the Head Start, young people coming in for an event, so that it would sustain itself with the ability to be generous at times to the community.
That brings up a good point, because one thing I did get a sense as I was reading the feasibility study is an awful lot there is focused on bigger regional kind of events, and I don't want to see it turn into a thing that we drive by while people from other parts of the state use it and enjoy it, but we're, I can only go to so many concerts.
I agree completely. We want it to be a hub of the community where there are community events and people from the community use it regularly.
And I think that was, a surprise when we got the feasibility study back, was that it did not envision the Ashland Theater being primarily a movie theater, but a live music venue with tickets in the $15 to $35 range. And when we have asked Dave, how did that idea come about, it was inspired by the Richmond Folk Festival and the success of that, and his coming to town to see Ashland Coffee and Tea performances and wanting to model something on Ashland Coffee and Tea, but injecting new capital into the building and getting it a little bit up to par. I mean, that was one of the first things that we thought was interesting. Obviously, showing movies throughout the year, it's in some of them in the studies more of the artsy movies and partnering with the college. I mean, and the artsiest movies that we've shown, Boyhood and a couple others, have been the ones that we've had the hardest time getting people to. It's been the Jaws and Back to the Future and Remember the Titans that we get 200 or 300 people. So it's been an interesting, that's been an interesting experience doing that. And also, I felt in terms of what you want the theater to do and whether it needs to generate a for-profit, revenue stream. I think the study showed us, it says that with the theater envelope as it is, you can't do that. You can't generate a profit that a developer would be satisfied in operating theater. And so I think one of the biggest surprises that we had was that the study calls for acquisition of adjacent property and turning that adjacent property into a for-profit revenue-generating business in a restaurant. And so that was definitely something that threw us for a loop. And that's one of the things we want to talk about, the $500,000 the town's putting up, $500,000 that the state's putting up. If adjacent property is acquired and turned into a restaurant and the town then leases it to an operator to operate both a restaurant and a theater, one of our concerns is to make sure that $1 million is sunk into the theater. The study asks for all the kitchen equipment for a restaurant to be bought, the stoves, the griddles, the pans, refrigerators. And then it doesn't speak to where the town gets the money to either lease the adjacent property or to purchase it and then to renovate it. And so we're looking at not only $500,000 for the grant, but probably between $200,000 and $300,000 to turn a building into a restaurant. So then the town's looking at $800,000. And that's kind of when I was asking what's the goal, that helped us evaluate whether acquiring that, because that's where the revenue for the town would be generated in this project. It would be solely the meals tax based off a restaurant. When we were thinking about pop-up mode, we've been operating the generosity of the town and not paying rent. And so certainly we thought when a feasibility study came back, it would kind of knock a community-run foundation out of the mix when we saw the pro forma and looked at the rent. But the rent is $0. for both the restaurant and the theater, for as long as the pro forma goes. So clearly, the pro forma is not saying that it's going to generate any money. Is that something that the town is comfortable with in terms of going into business with a developer who will rent the theater for free and run a restaurant that he will rent for free? And in theory, lease to a restaurant operator and get that revenue to the developer, but not the town. And that's just, especially some of the restaurants in town that are popping up and some of the new additions that have been done. We've got restaurants in the Food Lion Shopping Center that folks are investing their life savings in to run. Are we comfortable staying in a restaurant as part of this? And then getting back to the music venue piece of this, do we feel that a music venue, and when you ask Truman, what is your price ticket range, he says $15 to $35, whereas the theater now will have a $15 to $35 price range for its live music attractions. Do we feel that that's going to compete with Ashland Coffee and Tea? Versus if it was primarily a movie theater, could it complement Ashland Coffee and Tea? And it's been kind of, at least put to me, that, well, this is like why we have gas stations at multiple corners of an intersection, but this isn't Beale Street, this isn't New Orleans, it's not Nashville. I don't know if we have the capacity in a town this size to have two large live music venues with an attached restaurant. And that's just kind of that's been an open question for us. Maybe it could work, maybe it couldn't, we don't know.
And I just wanted to speak to one thing that Clark said, and it's something that I've kind of said, and I'm not a theater expert, I'm a plumber, but I just really believe that whatever path we go down with the theater, that we make sure we set this concept that we need a multifaceted space. It needs to do movies well, music well, drama well, community meetings well, and engage our different community constituencies, whether it's our high schools, our college, our churches, our people. To me, looking at it, and I believe this can be done in a couple of different models. I certainly think this is one model that, with modifications, it can happen, but we've got to make absolutely sure that our different constituencies can get in the building, and it needs to be nearly free so that we can engage those different sectors. And then there needs to be things that are for-profit that pay for it, so it pays its way. And in going around the country and looking at the theaters that are working, they are multifaceted. They're not hanging their hat on one single thing, but they can do a lot of different things well, and they're engaged with the community in towns like ours. So
yeah.
just stressing that it's so important.
And the margins are still small in getting those community. I mean, the renting of the theater out to community groups. It's a $53,000 profit after year one. Pro forma states $50,000 in revenue comes from renting the theater out to community groups. And I can tell you that the community groups we've worked with, whether it's a humane society or whether it's the schools or preschools or swim team or baseball team, they don't make a lot of money when they come to the theater. We charge them next to nothing if they provide their own sweat equity to help clean up and man the concession stand. It's about $250 or $300 to license a movie. So the feasibility study says now it's $600 minimum to come into the theater, plus the licensing fee, plus an hourly rental charge on top of that. So you're looking at $1,000 minimum for a humane society or a swim team to come in. And one, I think that's, if you were renting the theater to a for-profit operator and they were paying market rent for, then I could see someone justifying renting the space up. But if we're putting $1 million of taxpayer money into the theater, and then we're not charging any rent for the operator, we can't then be paying on top of that for our own community groups to be accessed. Even if we said, okay, we can be doing that, and we're all comfortable with that, the community groups that we have can't pay that, nor will they, because they'll lose money. Right now, they're doing this as nonprofits, or, like the Ashland Police Foundation is going to do an event there next month, but it's more like an intention grabber. It's laying a save the date for their thing in this, whenever it is, the fall or spring, their dance, but it's not being looked at as a big revenue generator. So that's a sticky wicket. When we've discussed that with Dave, who submitted the report, it's been a sticky point. Some things have been kind of floated that maybe the town could put up the money to rent the theater from Dave, which would just be, again, that would be, I think, this kind of gets back to public-private partnership, and that spectrum, anything that the town does with the theater, if they don't do, it's going to be public-private, whether they partner with a nonprofit or a foundation or for-profit. It's where on the spectrum is it in terms of risk and equity? And in this model that's been presented, the town's assuming 100% of the risk, and it's putting in 100% of the equity. So at the negotiating table, we should at least be able to negotiate to use our own building from time to time and not pay for it.
And as a suggestion, you know, I'm not telling anybody what to do, I'm just floating suggestions. No matter how wherever we end up, what path we go down, I firmly believe that somewhere between 50 and 60 days a year should be reserved contractually in writing with whoever's running it, that should be little or no cost community programming. And some of that time would be weekends, some time of that would be weekdays, but I think whether it's a public-private, whether it's some foundation that comes in here, no matter what we do, we need to take if it's a 30-year lease, there needs to be a 30-year calendar and little X's put on all the days. Those are the days for this year, 2016, that this is available at this number for the community. And that way everyone will know.
And it's important in the study, the revenue that's generated there, very upfront, is not through ticket sales, it's through concessions. And so if that's the case, you would want a group of 300 people to come in and watch Polar Express or to watch whatever it is, or come in there for Santa Claus and sell your concessions. If the money that's really being generated is the concessions, make sure that always stays with whoever the developer that's operating it. But you know, if the ticket sales are negligible, then the name of the game is getting foot traffic into the theater. And then, you know, one of the things we've been able to do with foot traffic is, for example, Peppicelli's is our in-house pizza provider. So they spent $300 and rented The Godfather this past weekend. And Tom and Lisa's uncle came from New Jersey and did, you know, whatever, trivia in the middle of it. But, you know, when Sweet Frog opens up across the street, if you walk across the street with your Sweet Frog in your hand, you're going to come on in and sit on down. We're not going to say no outside food allowed. You know, Caboose is our wine provider, and Chris Ray at Center of the Universe provides beer. So when we talk about how to leverage and encourage foot traffic to help businesses around Ashland, we need to think about that. How is the theater, if it has an on-site restaurant, where the stated goal is to get the people to come to Ashland Park, come to the theater, eat at the restaurant, drink at the theater, and not go down to Iron Horse or Trackside or Caboose, then, or not go to, you know, Ashland Coffee and Tea. How are those businesses helped by this? And if we think, you know, and so, because I don't think, you know, Peppicelli's being a pizza provider, I don't think we'll be getting wine from Caboose. You know, there'll be, and that may be fine, but if the idea is to generate foot traffic to help businesses.
So can I comment to a couple things there? I mean, I actually agree with you 100% about there ought to be, we should not be paying to put, the town should not be paying to put town events in a town building. I think that should be part of the contract, and that we should have dates or numbers of squared off events per year. I hope you didn't misunderstand what I said earlier. I wasn't suggesting that the town pay for the community organizations. I thought that ought to be a given, but one of the early comments from Dick was that, so what happens to liability for my equipment, et cetera, if an organization is using the building and equipment gets damaged? And I think one of the things that Charles and I have talked about early on is lots of times the town takes out a bond when we hold events for just that kind of thing, and I think it would be perfectly reasonable for the town to hold a bond on the building for when community organizations are using it. And it is perhaps, I mean, we're sort of operating under the notion that one restaurant is good for the next restaurant. You know, you always locate car dealerships together, you locate restaurants together, but perhaps we need a better understanding of how a restaurant in that space affects our other restaurants. I mean, perhaps that's information we need to understand better.
And that restaurant space could be where the operator brings equity to this deal. You know, that could be their skin in the game.
Right.
Yeah, you know, acquiring a space, building it out, all that.
But I mean, that's
This would sure be a lot easier to sell if it wasn't all us on the equity part of this.
well, and that's, you know, and that's when we've had our discussion, and we've been asked if this, and Bill McElroy is here, who owns the Slip Disc, and it's been great to work with, and hope no matter who operates the theater moving forward, that Bill plays an important role and has a great skill set that someone's going to need in there. But when we've asked if Bill were to make this building available today for you to purchase, would you purchase it? And the answer was no. It's too risky of an economic venture for me to do. So instead, the town, you purchase it and you retrofit it into a restaurant, and then you give it to me for free. And so that, you know, public-private partnerships are all about the government not wanting to do something 100% on its own. It's about how we do roads, it's how we do toll lanes. And so private sector, you know, will you incur some of the risk with us, and will you put equity into it so that you have a long-term vested interest in the project? And that kind of gets, I've got this handout here from, and this is something I've asked, and I don't necessarily have a totally clear answer. I think there's probably a exception or something for this. But this is the IRF design guidelines from the state. A couple on the, and if you go to first page, so the IRF grants are awarded as either grants or loans. And Department of Housing and Community Development will issue an IRF grant under the following conditions. The last one there on page 2, in cases where local government intends to lease the property to a private for-profit entity, a market rate lease is required. And then on page 3, if the project proposes a for-profit private end use, the department considers an equity investment by that entity into the project as an indication of long-term commitment.
I'm sorry, where are you?
Page 2 and 3.
Okay. In yellow. That one.
So either, this is from this year, so either this guidance is not correct, there's a waiver, there's some ability to get around that. And that's not something I've asked. I mean, this is something I pulled down off the state website. But, I mean, the state definitely envisions if this goes to a for-profit, because they give it to towns, the towns run things, nonprofits run it. The last theater to get an IRF grant is in Clifton Forge, and a nonprofit runs that theater. So the state does envision this happening, but if it happens, they want a for-market rent there, and they want an equity investment so that if this goes belly up in a year, if this doesn't work, and someone hasn't paid any money into it and doesn't have an equity investment, they can walk. And then we're left with whatever's been built. So, I mean, that's an answer. I mean, that's something we need answered sooner than later, I would think.
I don't think in any lease negotiation, you know, that those would key in to create those lease terms with whatever entity was doing that. And I just think we make sure we look at those terms.
Another, oh, go ahead.
If we're talking about certain propositions being too risky, it does seem like $1 million of public money going into a project certainly mitigates quite a bit of that risk. You think that, you know, if the developer actually wants to do it, that there can be a little bit of equity that they toss in as well.
And I just want to point out about developer equity, and you know, nobody listens to me, so I don't know I'm going to point it out, but I'm going to point it out. There is a lot of developer equity going in, and it's sweat and risk and startup capital, and the developer has not done a good job of identifying all these capitals that are going in. So, but it's not identified, so it's not there. There is, but it's not identified. So, and I have personally told him to identify it. He has chosen not to do it. So, therefore, it is not seen. You know, because you're starting up 3 businesses in the building. And so they're to start up the businesses, there's working capital and sweat and so, you know, but I just think we should point that out. I also think there are significant issues with the way things are structured at this point, and I think those questions we need to work on as a group. We're here to facilitate answering those questions so that we can then go to the public, make sure everybody's happy and get
Well,
what we don't want to happen is to have the $500,000 grant and the $500,000 matching money not go to work on our Ruby Slippery.
well, and to that, on the Ruby Slippers, so the theater, not a restaurant. And that, you know, and then within the theater, hard infrastructure costs versus soft costs. And that is, again, looking to where is this operator going to put his equity, $25,000 for a website, $20,000 for startup costs. Now, granted,
that's taxpayer money. That's state.
No, I get you. But granted, the feasibility study is a proposal that was paid for by the taxpayer already. I mean, so that's already a nice thing that the town has given $25,000 for
State.
the state has for a proposal to come back. So Normally, the proposal would be equity, you'd put in your own time to submit a proposal for something. In this case, we paid someone to propose something to us, but the website, the startup cost, advertising for the business is included, 25,000. And they get 50,000 for the kitchen equipment and adjacent business. That's $100,000 right there. That's a tenth of the grant. And if this doesn't work out, I mean, any business in this town has to put up its own website, has to do its own advertising, has to do its own. Everyone has equity, operational equity. When I go to work tomorrow, everyone has their own. That's not true equity in the sense of going into a big development project. But I mean, that's the kind of thing that if we're gonna have to negotiate, it needs to be brick. So I mean, a good example of this is there's this discussion in the HVAC in the feasibility study. It says HVAC probably needs to be replaced, although Hugh Joycing time did a lot of work and has it running. That HVAC costs about $100,000. We're not going to do that. We're going to put a Band-Aid on it, spend about 30 or 40. And after all, if it breaks, the town will replace it. And that, to Councilwoman Pritchard's point, the town taking out a bond for its own community groups to use the theater in case it breaks something. The feasibility study says that the landlord will cover all maintenance and electrical expenses, in not just the envelope of the theater, which a typical landlord-tenant relationship would cover, so roof and walls, but it's going to cover the electricity in there. If something goes wrong with the electrical, if something goes wrong with the plumbing, if something goes wrong with the new bathrooms, if something goes haywire with the projector or the screen, the town's going to pay for it anyway, is what it says in this feasibility study. So we're taking out a bond if one of our Shiloh Baptist Church breaks the projector, whereas if the projector breaks on a night where they're showing a movie, the town's going to pay for it. And so, I mean, those kind of leases do exist, but that's when you're charging the tenant a pretty high lease. That's $5,000 a month lease, and we'll cover all the incidentals. But if we're giving something for someone for free, there's some, and I know that's been discussed, but there's some level of maintenance that's got to be picked up by the tenant.
Now, their annual expenses, they were estimating something like $6,000 a year for repairs and maintenance as part of their...
Right. And that, over 12 months, it's kind of basic maintenance, it's janitorial.
Yeah, $6,000 won't fix a broken projector.
Yeah, and with the projector, again, we think it misses the mark making this primarily a music venue. In terms of the pitches, we bring people from the Richmond area here to Ashland, and I think that $15 to $35 price point, it's going to be hard for folks that live walking distance to the theater to afford that. There's 3 or 4, and I've always kind of joked to you, there's children, student, family, Randolph-Macon, high school. Those words, if you just do a control find, aren't found anywhere in the study. So I think it is going to price out some groups here. But the theater component to this, the movie component, is when folks walk in, they say, I remember the Ashland Theater, we've had families come and say, it's $5 a ticket, and it's $2 for popcorn, $1 for a drink. We can afford for our family of 5 to be here. If the music venue piece doesn't work, we want to make sure that there's a top-rate projection unit and screen in there. And the feasibility study says, because this isn't going to be primarily a movie venue, we're not going to go out and get the best projector. We're going to get one on the used market. Well, we kind of identified that the kitchen equipment, the website, the marketing, that's $100,000 right there that we could reallocate to making sure we have the best screen and best projector. Then if it goes belly up in 3 or 4 years and the live music venue doesn't work, you've got a movie theater that you can rock and roll with. And I think Hugh's been right on all the time that this theater, I mean, Hopewell Theater, the Beacon Theater down in Hopewell is $4 or $5 million project. And the Pulaski Theater, I mean, not a huge town, that's a multi-million-dollar renovation over the course of 20 years. It's going to take more than $1 million to get the theater where people want to get it. And so that kind of begs the question, there isn't a line item for reserve money in the pro forma. So every month we're putting away $200 in case the projection unit busts or in case we need to redo the seats. And we were told, well, it'll be there. I mean, if you take the for-profit piece out of it and you have a revenue-generating business, you can park all that profit in a reserve fund. But a reserve fund needs to be there because there will be major expenses to that, and there's going to need to be upgrades, which we're kind of the last piece is that architectural drawings in the back look fantastic, but there's no price estimate next to any of them. And so like I'm not, like you said, you are a plumber, so you know this, but if you look at the slip disc, just the masonry work to build that out all the way to the back of the property is estimated to cost $5,000. Now I'm not a mason or a plumber, but that's pretty darn low estimate to build that out, and as Chopper would note, there isn't and there's no cost estimate on what's been drawn up in the back here.
And I think to some extent in the feasibility study, just in defense of the feasibility study, are diagrammatical and not all allocated perfectly. And I think there's a lot of negotiation that has to take place between the operators and the town and police to clarify who's doing what and what's being spent on what. But I guess the key suggestion that maybe council can take away from and staff is, as we negotiate the contract, to make sure if we're spending $1 million, our suggestion is that $1 million goes into hard things that we own, durable things, sound, sight, light, accessibility, bathrooms, the things that we really need to make the building a modern day, accessible space for all types of users. And we just have to decide, is any hardware going into the restaurant piece or not, and how is that allocated. But our suggestion is to make sure that we focus on sight, sound, and light in the building, because those are the things that create the experience. And we'll let us, whoever's running it, sell it. So
And the fact that, to have a film entity, until it was opened up, we didn't have really a theater. I will say Randolph-Macon does have a little space that is like 60, 70 seats, and that was kind of a neat thing, and it is open to the public. But to actually have an experience where these nonprofits can go in to watch film, we have people coming down from Philadelphia to see the Bowman body. We got people coming in from other states wanting to be in Ashland, so that's achieved with film. So. Again, the feasibility study just saying music as the main primary thing. It's competition.
Yeah, so as somebody who works with projectors all day long, every day, it was a little bit concerning to me, some of the comments about, stepping a bit away from the movie side of things, especially since the projector that they were recommending doesn't actually exist. They're saying we should buy a 4K AKI projector. AKI doesn't make 4K projectors at all. So I'm kind of curious. The highest that they make is at 2K, but I think of the theater as potentially just this key identity piece for Ashland, like Steve was saying, and that of course can be split into multiple pieces. You've got our internal identity as a community, and then you have our identity to the rest of the region. I think that speaks a lot to, we do need a multifaceted theater. It really has to be, because showing Jaws is great. It's going to pull lots of Ashlanders in, but it might not pull people from the rest of the region in. On the other hand, having big music events might be more attractive to people out in the region, might be a little bit too expensive, or might not be as desirable to people internally. We want the theater to be available for our benefit. It's a public-private partnership, so that's kind of the whole point, that Ashland needs to benefit internally from this theater and shouldn't have to spend a ton of money to do it. But we also want to benefit, regionally, and so it seems like, that's kind of the point there, that we want to have people coming in, so we want it to be attractive on both angles. So it really does need to be multifaceted. We do need to be focusing a lot on making sure that what it does in all realms it can do well. It doesn't have to do it the best. This doesn't have to be the cinematic experience in the world, the best one in the world, but it does have to be a very competent cinematic experience. It has to be a very competent music venue. And I'm worried that right now, it's just kind of like, yeah, we're going to show some films every now and then, we'll throw in a projector, and there's been relatively little thought here to making it a true multifaceted benefit to the community. Right now it just seems like it's designed to pull people in from outside and not really benefit the people who are here paying for it.
Well, and that, McCormick, Dick McCormick was asked to produce a for-profit study.
Yeah.
And I think that's also been kind of calling it a feasibility study has been a bit of a curveball for folks in town. When they hear feasibility, when I heard feasibility study, I heard what's possible in this space. What are some options? If I'm going to buy a Corvette, I'm going to buy, not a Corvette what I drive, Kelly, I know you're there. I love that Scion, but the Scion or the Corvette, and what in between? Where can we allocate these $1 million? And then what's feasible in terms of the management? I didn't realize it was a developer's proposal. That, hey, you want me to propose something to make money on this? Here's how I propose to do it. And that also, the RFP did go outside the bounds of the RFP by saying, I can't make profit on this piece of property by itself, so I want you to acquire this piece and then also give that to me. I mean, that's a pretty sweet deal. I mean, if I could get that, I would love to do that. Acquire the whole block and let me turn both of them into restaurants. I mean, that someone can make a profit off of that.
We probably hearing this over and over, but I want to underline it again, that Hugh's point about multi-purpose. That's very important, and it gives you flexibility about what you need to do and what you can do as whoever's operating it. But if there's an investment for a restaurant, then it's a die has been cast at that point. And so once that die is cast and that investment is made, if it were not to work, then somebody else has to come in, and now not only are you trying to make a theater work, you're trying to make a theater with a restaurant work.
Well, and to that point, Steve, just a couple things. I mean, one, I know the lease is going to be written, would be written in such a way that there are performance metrics in it, but there's discussion of historic tax credits in the feasibility study. Historic tax credits can be accessed. We hire a consultant, pay that consultant $30,000 to access from the IRS what is going to be $60,000 worth of historic tax credits. So we get a plus 60, which is good. The IRS requires you have a 39-year lease with a for-profit operator. So I think that is a discussion worth having. Is $60,000 worth entering into almost a 40-year lease with somebody? And then you're also limited, if you access historic tax credits, what you can do in the repairs to that building. One of the things that we hear the most, that we'd like to change are the lights. Those neon lights that go up either side. And the lights have been one of the entities that have been pointed out, well, if you access these historic tax credits, you may need to keep the long neons because they're historic. So is it worth it to be limited what you can do structurally, and is it worth it to go into such a long lease? That's so when we got the feasibility study back, I think we expected discussion about that. The market study was pulled out of this feasibility study, which we've sent notes to town council about, just so you all know that was something that.
Clarify what happened.
Yeah, so the market feasibility study would be interviewing people, doing a market study to see whether or not a live music venue was even feasible in the town. It was pulled out, represented to us it would be too expensive to do. It would be the full $25,000. And time consuming. So it was discussed with town staff, and then town staff talked to the Virginia Main Street headquarters about pulling that piece out. So at our first meeting,
but it was requested by the developer that it be removed. We did not make that request. It was by the developer,
right,
which was subsequently approved by the town and the state.
So when
if you read the thing, it says we requested it. We did not.
Right. So, but when you go to that section, you would see something fleshed out a bit. Is this doable in this economy, in this Ashland economy? And so when we've asked for the comparables, well, what theaters were looked at to build this feasibility study? And there's 15 of them. 11 of the 15 are run as nonprofit, are theater foundations. One of them is actually run by a Parks and Rec department. So when 11 of 15 of them are run in a certain way, and that's who those are the comparables you're using to build this. But there's no discussion of any other way to run the theater but a for-profit way.
Well,
Anyway, it's
and that's something I wanted to ask, because most of our conversation so far has been in the context almost as a critique of the feasibility study. But your original question was, what are our goals for this thing? And we started talking about nonprofit versus profit, and so then honestly, I get a little squeamish sometimes as we've just come off of the whole, we've got to limit public events because of our ability as a town to contribute tax revenue to police, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know much about the nonprofit organizations and would be interested in.
As far as the listing of all the nonprofits that have been involved with the theater?
No. I mean, it's one thing to do what we've been doing for a while. It's something else when we need $100,000 HVAC and there's a line item in the town budget and we have to choose between that and 2 more policemen.
Well, one thing I just want to point out as far as the study goes itself, Clark mentioned the lack of surveying the people that had been using it, just a minimal information. But as far as the developer coming to experience the theater is one event, that he was at, and just for part of it, really. So as far as getting that information and basing it on the study, I think, we Main Street wanting to just give comments so that suggestions, ideas, but based on the full evolution since November 21st.
And then, I see, what is
But what I don't want to do is wind up there.
No, I'm with you.
Where we're back on a shoestring.
Sure.
And suddenly we've got to choose between something that's got to have and something we've got to have to run the town.
But are we already on the hook for that, so to speak, anyway?
Well, and yeah, exactly. And we were talking about this beforehand, in terms of what would we talk about tonight, and we only have one plan that's been submitted. And what's been represented to us is that an RFQ and RFP process happened. Dave McCormick was the only qualified person out of the RFQ process, so thereby he was the only person qualified to answer the RFP. What we have been represented to us is that Dave has been the only option for quite some time. Would be happy to so given that, we very much wanting to work with this study and work with Dave and make it work. But if you're asking what another option is, that's a question we've been waiting to have asked, because I think there are other options worth exploring. And the state wants Ashland to have this money. This money is not tied to any one person.
Right.
And it's not, there's no time ticker, ticking down a 30-day window that if you don't use this, you lose this. I can guarantee the state wants the town to have it, but we're not going to go out there and create an alternate feasibility study and submit it unless we see that there's a appetite for that, and that's an option that folks want to explore. I mean, that's.
And we've been on the fence about having a for-profit partner versus a non-profit partner. There's merit to both. The takeaway from all these meetings and discussions and everything we've done talking about this has been that for-profit tends to lock out a community from using that space that is completely behind it. Very supportive, and I mean they're here, they're ready to work. All of them. So I think you're correct. Moving forward, we can't be pop-up part 2 or any of that. It has to be something stellar.
It needs to be the real deal.
The real.
And Jen, through our 50-some events, we have brought in 40, 50,000. We have 30 in the bank now.
30 in the bank,
I mean,
right under 30.
We've tried intentionally not to make money. I mean, we're pretty good at that.
Yeah.
I'm no plumber, but I don't know how to make money. But we've brought in 50,000 and have 30 sitting there. We've got 35 or 40 put in.
Well,
And the other bit about the money is that $100,000 HVAC bill is coming due in a year or 2. And it's not going to be paid by the developer.
Right.
The nice thing about a community foundation is that it's still going to take $1 million or $2 million to get this theater where it needs to be. And a nonprofit entity you would have tax deductible donation. You could go after grants that are out there that don't avail themselves to a for-profit. There's a Kickstarter campaign going on in Springfield right now for a theater that's a nonprofit to replace their seats, $100,000, and they met that like in 2 weeks. There's things you could do to raise money. But let me tell you, I mean, the feasibility study tells you theaters are tough. There's one in Churchill that just went out of business that's getting turned into condominiums. There's one on the West End. I come up from Alexandria. We have a $6 million Old Town theater in one of the richest zip codes in the country, and it's going to be turned into a commercial space. It's gone through 3, so it's going to be tough no matter what. But I would much rather have the local, and to James, to your point, Jaws brings in the money to get the Head Start kids there for free. to get Restoration Church there to do something, and that's the flexibility you have if you're a nonprofit setup. Whereas if you're a for-profit setup, you know, you can't just give away the venue for free every weekend. It doesn't work, you know. So there's not an easy answer here, and I think a nonprofit or foundation setup would be pretty difficult. It would be a stretch. It would be asking. I mean, we have trouble getting folks to volunteer. What is it? Where is that sound?
It's a
I know,
feedback on
every
the
time you
microphone.
talk, it's like,
Pull that one up.
I think they're recording this.
I think they are too.
Mr. Kimball is in the next room taking minutes as well as recording this,
So no question, it would be tough for that.
But this has always looked like Carter Park Pool to me. It's like an amenity for the town now. You know, this is unique because it's given to the town, and we could treat it like something that is a headache, is costly, doesn't make us any money, but improves the quality of life greatly for everybody who lives here, which would be fantastic.
But it just as a couple points forward, and to feed in, you know, McCormick, as he went through this process and this feasibility study, you know, was kind of, as he went in his MOU and he was given instructions by staff, and I was in most of those meetings, you know, all along his issue wasn't, let's turn it into condominiums, or let's turn it, you know, could it be a strip center, or his whole deal was, it's going to be a theater with a restaurant. That's, you know, and that was kind of the thought process that had always been along for my time came around here. But a diverse, you know, theater doing variable programs. So that's how he wrote his feasibility study. So there's a reason that it didn't go off. And you know, we were working with a grant, a very receptive people on that. And you know, time kills all deals. I'll say it again: time kills all deals. So he was working very quickly. He was working with one mission in mind. And so there was a reason that the feasibility study looks like it looks. Mm-hmm. With that being said, and we've test-driven the theater. We know what it can and can't do. We know what it can and can do for the community. So, you know, we really stand ready to look at, you know, this strategy which we have before us, or other strategies if we choose. And I mean, that's something we've got to defer to staff and council. That's not, we don't think it's appropriate for us to make recommendations, but what we really want to make sure is that we've got that community program. It's diverse, in that if we spend $1 million, we put $1 million into hardware, in preferably theater hardware. And remember, I'm telling you, as a contractor, I run the numbers on this thing. I really want $2.5 million. That's what I want, because that's what it's really going to take. So, you know, there is a lot that needs to be done, and it would be a shame to pass on that first phase, and we got to figure out a way to make that first phase work. I don't know what that looks like. We're going to have to defer, but you know, I think we've hopefully given you some information that can help make discussions and public comment periods and things of that nature fruitful.
A couple of things I just want to throw out to both of you before they get lost in the conversation is Henrico Theater, which is much bigger than our theater, costs $4 million on referendum, so bond referendum. So I think 2.5 sounds really reasonable for what it's going to take ultimately.
Over time.
But Clark, one of the things that's appealing to me about historic tax credits is not that you tie to that you tie to a particular developer, not necessarily this one, for 39 years, is that I want to make sure whatever we do in this process, that we also are long-term protecting the theater. Because 20 years from now, maybe you'll still be at this table, but I won't, and I'm guessing you won't. And
I don't have to take that.
How much Hugo's runs every day?
I didn't mean he'd be dead.
Wonderful, all those
I don't intend to be dead in 20 years either. I just don't intend to be sitting at this table. But my point is, a lot of us will not be involved with this process, with the theater, in 20 years. And that the historic tax credits protect changing things in the theater. It does protect the integrity of the building in a way that we might not be able to otherwise do. And I want to make sure we do protect the integrity of that building.
And the nice thing about those, I mean, that $30,000 that would go to the consultant to access those credits, he'll take $30,000 from anybody. And so the feasibility study has some nice pieces to it, and that's owned and property, intellectual property of the town and Main Street. And so the asbestos remediation study that's been done needs to be done anyway. It's in the back there. I mean, you can still have a store, and the nice thing about the Ashland Theater, it's owned 100% by the people of Ashland. So the biggest cost that anyone deals with in these towns when they try to acquire historic properties is the acquisition cost. That's done. And so the town owns it now. And so the question is, if the town owns it, how do we keep it in the town's hands, the people's hands, or do we go into a 39-year lease with a for-profit person who then, and so that's kind of, and they talk about how much money goes in. Pulaski Theater is owned by a foundation. The Commonwealth Attorney of Pulaski has been the executive director of it, or chair. They've taken 15 to 20 years to restore that theater brick by brick. They had to raise a good amount of money to buy it to begin with, 15 years, which the town doesn't have to do. But then every couple of years they replaced seats. They did the marquee. They did a new bathroom. They did a new projection. And now it's in a tough part of the state, in Southwest Virginia, a $3 or $4 million theater completely restored. And so, I would kind of, again, the feasibility says the first year we're going to do about 40 or 50 events. So that's roughly what we've done in this pop-up mode. And so we don't have to overnight, after this $1 million renovation gets done, in my opinion, do anything but what's been going on there in a much nicer space with a lot more discipline, a much larger group, and hiring. You need a full-time executive director to do your bookings, to run that. You need to pay for janitorial. You need to pay for people to help pop popcorn and that sort of thing. And the study does say that this theater will produce 10 full-time jobs, which is also a question worth exploring, because that's an open question as to whether or not that theater would be the largest employer in downtown Ashland when it's done.
What was your second item?
Or one of them.
No, I did tip my 2 items. The one is that I do think $2.5 million is a reasonable sum, and the second is whether.
Preservation.
Preservation,
Right.
yeah. And I would argue still, Clark, and again, I'm not arguing for Dave, I'm arguing for some kind of preservation measure, because there have been councils before who are willing to let a gym slide. I want to make sure whatever we do, we've got some kind of legal mechanism to long-term protect the integrity of that building.
That's a good point.
And just
to have some ideas on ways to do that other than historic tax.
Well, I was going to say, you can just do it in the lease or in your MO or your agreement in a longer, the tax credits were so small in this one, there a lot of maneuvers, and sometimes the maneuvers, they're preservationistic, in theory, but they are very hindrances in realistically using the building. So sometimes they can kind of go in the wrong direction. So that there's a two-way street on those. But to your point, I think any deal, anything that's done, we should spell out how we want to protect the building and what we do want people to do and what we don't want them to do. I think we can do that legally.
And one of the positives of this building is its design. The external facade, the internal lack of ornamentation that you see at a lot of these older theaters. That's a challenge to get, custom craft people to come in and fix these things up. This is a pretty plain envelope in the sense, that's just the Art Deco style and everything goes along with it. So I think that's definitely something that's a plus in the renovations of this, no matter how you do it.
And about 2 months ago, we had the Historical Theater Society of America. They stopped at 30 theaters in Virginia. They stopped at 200 people, 150 people came.
From all over the
These
world.
are the owners of Bow Tie Cinemas, the folks in San Francisco that does nothing but the neon. And of all the places they visited, they said this is one of our favorites. And we would love to do anything we could to help with this. If you need advice, if you need consulting. The Art Deco Society of Virginia has an annual ball at the Haxel House. And they have asked in January if we would like to be their designee this year. They raised $10,000 last year for the Bird Theater. We have said yes. We don't know exactly what's going to happen and who's going to be operating it, but under its current model, they would like our group to, they'd like the town to benefit, and they raised $10,000 last year for the Bird Theater, which has gone through its own struggles and is run as a foundation now. So I mean, there's no question that it's a beautiful theater, and people, and we need to do everything we can to protect it. I was not saying we shouldn't do that. I was just pointing out that in the feasibility study, a discussion of what you get and what the trade-offs and consequences are of accessing this with a specific leasee, is that you are committed for 39 years.
And just as an point to all the people, the CFO of Bowtie Cinemas was in there, and he pulled me aside and indicated that this was his favorite building, and that he really liked this theater, and at some point we're going to, I don't know what we'll do with him, but he loved it. So it was very interesting to see the reception of the building, which when I go back to, it needs to be preserved. It is a set of ruby slippers, and you know what the good witch, well, she's from the east, she said after Dorothy got the ruby slippers, be very careful with them. Don't let anybody take them. Don't anybody mess them up. Same thing with this building. We just need to treat it with great care.
Just to add to that, there's a world-class architect, Tom Johnson, who recently visited the theater, looked at it to help a potential buyer a few years back, to give them some advice. And his comment when he was called was, I haven't forgotten about that theater. It's been in the back of my mind. It stays there. And so there's something about it that people that know the business see the value. People in the community see the value. And so there's a lot of people with a lot of credentials that can help guide or speak to this process. We haven't heard from everybody that we can hear from to help guide this decision. So, I'm all for hearing from more experts. We're hearing from the community, and soon we'll hear more from the community. But hearing from people that know this business and from people that love this building, there's a lot to look forward to at the end of that.
Charles, are we under any kind of deadlines for this funding process?
We're working with DHCD on trying to understand how far out we can go with the process. I'm waiting response from them right now. Mrs. Amos is out of town on vacation this week, so she's been talking with them, but we'll have some answers from them pretty quickly on a time frame. And also going back to Clark's concerns about the options of what they'll allow with the grant money. I think that's the other thing we're trying to get. And this is all without them seeing any agreements or anything too. I mean, DHCD has a very regimented agreement process that they're going to go through and review no matter who we do business with. And so that's part of this as well.
I just want to say thank you so much to this group of people who have put so much into this and yet still come to the table, taking self out of it and trying to help the town to find the very best possible way forward. And this conversation has been very helpful.
Something that shows up in our comprehensive plan in terms of the physical build-out of the town, but something that doesn't show up in the plan is the people. And this kind of community involvement is what makes Ashland Ashland. Echo the thanks expressed to you. And I'll express thanks to all the citizens who have been providing us with your comments through this process. We haven't always responded because we haven't always been at a point where we could make any responses, but we're now moving to that point where public comment going both directions is going to become appropriate, and we look forward to continuing to hear your input. And we will continue to work with Ashland Main Street, and again, thank you for all the work that you've put in on this so far. We've only just begun.
Yeah. Well, we thank everyone as well, and great work by the theater committee, and we're here to do whatever we need to do to help create a winning project.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else from anybody else?
September 2nd in this room, 6:30 p.m. We'll be having more discussion.
6:30, another work session.
And Dave McCormick from Waukesha will be here at that time.
Okay, great.
Thank you all. We are adjourned.